So I was asking you about the DNA points that you had on your blog, and how you see women holding up with those 11 points, and where we'd need to beef up.
Yeah. Let me start, Pema, by saying that in my household, when I was growing up,
yes,
my father was a pediatrician. He was a doctor, not a business person, and my mom was a nurse. So really in my house, and she really wore the pants in my house. So, I was sort of shaped from a very maternally run household. And so I hope by prefacing with that, if I stereotype a little bit or generalize a little bit, I'll be forgiven a tiny bit.
You will.
So what I tell teams is I think it's important to have a diversity of men and women, and we know in entrepreneurial companies there's too many men.
Yes.
I recently funded a company with 2 co-founders, and the requirement of my funding was that they hire a 3rd co-founder that was a woman.
Wow.
Yeah, and we're in the process. We've made an offer. I'm hoping she'll accept.
Wow.
So if you're watching, please accept. So my broad characterizations would be, do you lose me or am I there?
No, you continue, yep.
Okay. My broad generalizations would be, the old book, Women Are From Venus and Men Are From Mars,
yes,
or whatever?
Yep.
Men tend to be confrontational. They tend to be bullheaded. They tend to want to fight. They tend to want to one-up each other in terms of knowledge and content.
Yep.
And women seem to be more bridge builders.
Okay.
And finding common solutions.
Okay.
And I think a healthy dose of both in a company is very good.
Yeah.
So I hate to be somewhere where you don't have bridge builders.
Yeah.
The second is overwhelmingly women are more organized. Men tend to be more chaotic. So I would say that they tend to be more organized. Men tend to be more scatterbrained. Women tend to be more efficient in the office place. So they come to work to get stuff done.
Yes.
And they tick through their lists and they get shit done.
Yes.
And then tend to be more, have chats around the water cooler type. I think both styles of working work really well.
Yes.
It's about knowing the differences, catering to your strengths, underpinning any weaknesses you have.
Yes.
I think men, and this is generalizing,
yes.
not every woman is this way, but
I agree.
Men tend to be more aggressive on business development, in my experience.
Right.
Women tend to be slightly more understated.
Okay.
And learning to be more assertive and dogmatic in pursuing biz dev relationships, I think is a skill that would be great for every woman to develop.
Yep.
But I think it's yin and yang. I think we each have our strengths and weaknesses, which is probably the way DNA was.
What would you see as the obstacles for inclusion of more women entrepreneurs in achieving funding generally?
The starting point is more women who want to do it.
Okay. Beef up the numbers then.
Yeah. I mean, look, if we're going to have an honest discussion about men versus women,
yes,
we have to be honest with each other about the biggest difference.
Yes.
The biggest difference is that somewhere between the age of 30 and 42, many women have kids.
Yes.
And obviously families have kids, and our society, rightly or wrongly, I'm not having a judgment call,
yep.
tends to be such that the man continues with full-time work and the woman either does part-time work or stops working completely or takes 6 months off or whatever.
Yes.
And then has usually, not always, but usually primary child-rearing, caring activities.
Yes.
Now let's look at the age of most men when they're out raising capital? Well, it's probably somewhere in the 28 to 35 range.
Yes.
And I honestly think, again, if we're going to talk openly about this, I think that plays a role in it.
Okay.
I look at my wife, okay? I very publicly say my wife is more accomplished educationally and career-wise than I ever was. She went to Brown undergrad. She has a Wharton MBA.
Wow.
She worked at Google. She's worked in corporate strategy. You know, she got, I guess, the job I probably wouldn't have got based on GPA.
Yeah.
And, but listen, we have 2 little kids.
Yes.
And my wife at that point, by the way, you know, I encouraged her to go back to work if she felt she wanted to do that. She took a year and a half off after the first child.
Right.
And then she went back, and I encouraged it, and we got a full-time nanny.
Yeah.
We had a second child. She took another year and a half off at her choice.
Yes.
And then she went back to work.
Yes.
And now that our kids are 7 and 5, she's wrestling with, I want to work, I want to be professional, I want to do something meaningful, but I also want to help my son do his homework.
Yes.
And again, it's by choice. It's not anything, I mean, she knows. I've encouraged her to say, do what you feel comfortable with.
Yes.
And I will support it. But when you think about what it takes to be a startup CEO, on a moment's notice, jumping on an airplane to fly for a deal is something that's the norm.
Yes.
And again, I think if we're going to talk realistically about that, we have to acknowledge it. You know, I think if you look at most entrepreneurs that get funded, male or female, tend to be in that kind of 24 to 35 range. And there are outliers. You know, there are Jessica Ma got funded recently, and she's 19.
Yes. Yeah, I know. I read about
and on
that.
the male side, Brian Wong got funded. He was 18. So there are exceptions, and there are teams that get funded in their 40s. The first deal I ever did was funding someone who was 40 and has 2 kids. So I'm not opposed to it. But if we look at the data, I would bet you, and I haven't looked at the data, but I would bet you overwhelmingly skewed to 25 to 33.
Yes, yes. And you know, you're right, the facts of life do interfere both for men and women, so I understand what